Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. What a pleasure it is to be here tonight. Really a very nostalgic evening for me. It was a delight to arrive this evening and see so many old friends, but what an absolute thrill it is to be with founding Chairman Stanley Weiss. I had not seen the Weisses much since the dinner 25 years ago because of extensive travel schedules on both of our parts, but we looked at each other instantly and thought we hadn't changed a bit. Well, I must say it's a good thing they're not running the loop from the dinner 25 years ago, because you'd know I was telling a tall tale here. But it really has been very, very gratifying to see the development of this organization over the last 25 years. This is an organization that burst onto the scene and did something actually very courageous 25 years ago. It showed Dwight Eisenhower's farewell address in its entirety to a rapt audience. As a matter of fact, we were a little worried that the late president mumbled over some of his words. He scratched his head once. He cleared his throat. It was very obvious that it was an untutored speech. I don't think he was comfortable with the teleprompter at all. But despite the fact that we had now been well and truly part of the communications age over that time, you could have heard a pin drop in the room. And I think part of that is because the speech had a certain resonance even back in 1986. At that time, of course, people were fascinated by the idea of the origins of the expression of the military-industrial complex. But it was really the Benz organization that not only, of course, marked that important concept and some of the others in the speech, but really brought focus to the idea of balance in and among national programs, and to tie what was really an essentially all-Eisenhower idea about the notion that our economy is as central to our national defense, actually, as our military capability. Now, you know, in thinking about this speech, and I think it's gotten a lot of recognition this year, 50 years is a long time, that's half a century, and I must say, since I remember my grandfather well, and I remember his exit from Washington after that speech, it is a sobering thing to see the speech again and to see that it still has a great relevance for today. By the way, I'd like to just comment on the fact that I was up in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania over the weekend. It was one of those beautiful spring days, and I have a country property up on South Mountain. And I was driving down Confederate Avenue thinking about what really a different time it was. Let's see, Eisenhower left office on January 20th, 1961. Without Secret Service men. He had no Secret Service protection until the Kennedy assassination, but if you can imagine, this old soldier had not driven a car since 1935. And actually, I was told by the Park Service that runs his house in Gettysburg that they have some wonderful oral histories there by the local cops who used to stop him on a regular basis and give him speeding tickets. He had a rather heavy foot, I'm told, and Confederate Avenue is that maddening 25 miles per hour. But still, it's hard to imagine a time when an American president could leave the White House and go into retirement without a Secret Serviceman. And yet, despite the differences in our time, that speech and the era that he represented has new contemporary relevance today, because we are in one of those transformational times, much like the 1950s were. If President Barack Obama had one of those, oh my gosh, this is a game-changing year, the year he got elected, 1953, was a game-changing year too, with the death of Joseph Stalin in March of that year. In any case, we see a lot of similar trends. We have, in the long trend lines, like the 1950s, today we have rapid changes in technology. The United States' position on the world stage is changing. We are living in an era of economic constraints, and we have changing views about threat assessments at a time when some of our moral values are changing as well. And yet this speech and other speeches that Eisenhower gave, including, I think, one of his very finest called A Chance for Peace, given right after Stalin's death, underscore certain principles that continue to persist and to have resonance over all these years. He said in this speech about arrogance, he said, "Any failure traceable to arrogance or lack of comprehension or readiness to sacrifice would inflict upon us grievous hurt both at home and abroad. Of course, the Rangers that we saw this evening, what an inspiration you are to all of us, and I know my grandfather would be very proud of the fact that we still produce the greatest fighting men in the world. You might be interested to know, by the way, that the Park Service also said something very interesting when I met with them over the weekend. They said that John Kennedy had been absolutely astonished and bewildered by the fact that President Eisenhower wanted to have his 5-star rank returned to him after he left the presidency. And John Kennedy couldn't understand why he'd want to return to his 5-star rank and not retain his title as former president. Well, it turns out he was able to do both, but the point is that this was a really unique thing that he brought to the presidency. A lot of the way he had the government organized and many of the ways he approached the strategic challenges were aided enormously by the training he had in the military. I would say perhaps one of the most important things, and this is really the thought I want to leave you with tonight, is that he was really playing for the long game. Like any good strategist, he wasn't just playing the next play, he was playing many moves ahead. He understood that to face down the Soviet Union during the Cold War would require sustainable policies that would project power and resolve while assuring national solvency and create an environment that would foster and promote free enterprise. This was not an easy task in a country that needed to modernize, as it simultaneously assumed for the first time the mantle of post-war leadership. Despite this, the Eisenhower administration balanced the budget 3 times during its tenure, the Cold War record. He often said, you know, the question about defense is how much do you really need? And he understood that really to defend this country, sometimes restraint could be the most important asset. He was the person that underscored and made real over the course of his 8-year term the idea of containment, understanding that containment and a long-term strategy went hand in hand. He resisted tremendous amount of political pressure during that time, especially when he told congressional leaders that our most realistic policy is to hold the line until the Soviets managed to educate their people, and by doing so, sow the seeds of destruction of communism. Now, and he warned Congress it would take a very long time. Well, it's hard to imagine that we could actually hold on for such long-term results today because we are buffeted by so many different elements and different political pressures. But in playing for the long game, he wrote Swede Hazlitt, his high school friend, the national economy was as much a pillar of national defense and national military capability. He said to Hazlitt, "Let us not forget that the armed services are to defend a way of life, not merely land, property, or lives." And so as we go and look at this speech again today, there are many, many relevant pieces to it. Of course, the military-industrial complex will remain probably the most famous element of that speech. But he outlined many other challenges facing our nation, including the job of retaining an alert and knowledgeable citizenry. But frankly, if you'd like to know what my favorite part of the speech is, it is hands down the bit about his grandchildren, of course. He said it as he got towards the end of his speech. He says, "As we peer into society's future, we, you and I and our government, must avoid the impulse to live only for today, plundering for our own ease and convenience the precious resources of tomorrow. We cannot mortgage the material assets of our grandchildren without risking also the loss of their political and spiritual heritage. We want democracy to survive for all generations to come, not to become the insolvent phantom of tomorrow." Thank you very much.